Hello, hope you're well. Thanks for coming by. Today I'm going to do another ripping through my records segment. This is where I pull a random item out of my record collection and I record it into my digital library, into my digital archives, thus ripping my vinyl. And this literally is just me pulling out random items from my collection. And I usually tend to focus on records that I can't find digitally, because otherwise I don't want to prioritize records that I can just go to Apple Music and, you know, listen to the digital copy. It's just there, it's easy to find. Apple Music creates really nice, high quality digital audio files, and so I tend to focus on records that are not easy to find digitally. Like you just can't really hear them any other way. And today I'm focusing on this. Holger Hiller. As is. Holger Hiller. This is a man that I have deep respect for. He was part of that 80s Mute crew. And I think he's one of those guys that is on a lot of records that you guys have heard, but you maybe necessarily have not heard his name. But he's one of those guys that has made some really good music. He's produced and remixed some classic stuff. And I think a lot of people don't know his name. And I think you should. And I'm always excited to make people aware of fringe names, maybe, like Holger Hiller. I don't know how fringe of a name he is. I'm sure plenty of people know who he is. But I personally feel that most people don't know who he is. And he hasn't made a lot of music recently. He was really busy in the 80s and somewhat in the 90s. I don't know that he makes a lot of music anymore. I can't recall seeing his name on anything recently. And this album came out in 1991. Again, please give me a break if I'm off by a year or two, but I'm pretty sure this came out in 91. 99% of the time, I'm correct with my facts in my head. As always, I only go off what's in my memory banks at that moment. I'm not scurrying around checking Wikipedia and Discogs and shit like that. I'm going off of my memory only. I think it's more interesting when you're making a video to just think off the top of your mind instead of, reading the internet, basically. I think this came out in 1991. Pretty sure. And this is my experience with Holger Hiller in general. The first time I remember seeing Hiller's name on a record was an Erasure record. He remixed Erasure. And then I saw him remix Depeche Mode. And then I saw him produce or remix, I can't remember which one. I think he produced or edited or remixed Nitzer Ebb. So again, he was part of that Mute crew. And then there was a point where I noticed his name on a group called Palais Schaumburg, which also featured Thomas Fellman, my dude, Thomas Fellman. And I have already mentioned this before, but for those of you who are new to my channel and you would be interested in seeing this, I interviewed Thomas Fellman when I worked at Discogs. He is part of the Orb. Sometimes he works with Alex Patterson, sometimes he doesn't. In my opinion, he's worked with Alex Patterson on some of the greatest Orb albums. It's Thomas Fellman. We love Thomas Fellman. He's a master electronic producer. He is extremely talented, and I learned firsthand that he's a hell of a nice guy. I interviewed him for a good hour or so for Discogs. So if you're interested in reading my interview with Thomas Fellman, I'll put a link in the body of this video so you can check that out. And I'll put a couple of music samples from old Holger Hiller here as well, as I always do in my videos. But I think Palais Schaumburg was correct me if I'm wrong, I'm probably wrong, but I think that was the first time that Holger Hiller released something. was as Palle Schaumburg with people like Thomas Fellman. And that was way back in the early 80s. So Hiller was one of those guys that was around in the 80s. You'd see his name pop up on stuff, and it was always interesting. You Renegade Soundwave fans, and I know you're here because I did a Renegade Soundwave video on my channel a couple years ago, and to this day it's one of my most popular videos. Holger Hiller remixed Renegade Soundwave, specifically on the In Dub album. You know that track Holgatron? Holgatron? Where do you think that Holg comes from? Holger. It's basically, Holgatron is basically a Holger Hiller remix of Traitor. One of the best songs on that album. He also remixed Bacteria, or produced it, or whatever that. It seems like Bacteria always just seemed like its own track on In Dub. It wasn't even a remix. But Bacteria is a Hiller track. Holgatron is a Holger Hiller track. So you Renegade Soundwave fans, did you know that? I bet some of you didn't know that, but you should. Holger Hiller's a really interesting guy. I would always see his name and I would jump at the chance to buy that record because he had his own signature sound and nobody sounds like this guy. I think if you were to try to describe his sound, it would be a disservice to what he did. He remixed Fortran 5 too. I remember this. It just came to my mind. Another mute act. He was a mute guy. Daniel Miller liked to put his guys to work. That mute ecosystem in the 80s and early 90s was really fun. And he remixed Fortran 5. I want to say that what was the song? I remember I think one of the mixes was called the King Tubby Noise mix or something. What was the song? Was it Crazy Earth? I can't remember. But he remixed Fortran 5. Anyway, Holger Hiller's an interesting guy. I don't want to try to put a tag on what he did. It's too it would be too limiting to do that. I think the only word that could possibly describe what Holger Hiller did was adventurous. His music never sounded the same. It was based in electronic music, but he flirted with all kinds of different ideas and themes: jazz, techno, ambient, noise, industrial. You industrial fans, and I know you're in my audience, if you like the more pressing, experimental, cutting edge type of 80s style of electronics, you should definitely check Holger Hiller out. He was someone that was just dedicated to experimenting. I'm going to leave it at that. He has all kinds of themes with his music, but I don't want to try to define it. Like on this album in particular, and I just ripped this, so it's fresh in my mind. You hear some crazy, wacky vocals, like Leslie Weiner. Is it Weiner? I don't know her name. Leslie Weiner. By the way, you should check out Leslie Weiner if you don't know. She put out an album on Trans Global back in the early 90s, which is excellent. Maybe I'll do a video on that. She worked with Carl Bonney, another Renegade Soundwave connection. You know who else worked with Carl Bonney? Holger Hiller. They put out a 12-inch as Ohio Bang Bang, and I'll link to that. Great song. Really cool video, too. One of the best songs Hiller ever did, really, I think. And I'll show that record. I've got it here with me. Really cool video as well. But Carl Bonney, another Renegade Soundwave connection. But Leslie Weiner shows up on here. She does vocals on a track. It's a very experimental album. And when I say experimental, I mean that in the most positive of terms. He flirts with all kinds of ideas here. You hear jazz, you hear industrial, you hear dub, you hear techno. Did I say ambient? You hear ambient. It's all kind of working together. It's a bubbling pot. It's a stew that's just bubbling with all kinds of different ingredients and different spices. And then when you eat it, it's unlike anything you've ever eaten before. That's what this record sounds like. Nothing sounds like this record, and I love it when that happens. It just doesn't happen. It's so rare, and I can't compare this record with anything I've ever heard. It sounds completely authentic and original in its delivery. And that's how I think of Holger Hiller. He's one of those dudes who exists in his own air. He's incomparable. And I think this is his best album, as is. And this is, I hope I did a good job of describing this too. I always, again, I hate to, as someone who's so varied and so individualistic with the way he presents his music and himself, I hesitate to try to confine his sound with a genre tag or something. I just don't think it's a disservice. His music's way too complicated for that. All I can say is check it out and listen to it, because you won't hear anything else like it. This is my copy. I don't know. Let me pull it out of its protective sleeve here. I don't know if this came out on any other edition on vinyl. As you can see, I bought this when it was new back in '91. So it came in this PVC sleeve here, and I've ripped it. I don't know how I did that. I mean, listen, I've had this thing for almost 35 years. This is the kind of thing that happens. Record is still in good shape, though. It sounds good. This side's torn as well. I've handled this record a lot. And I'm not going to pull the record out of the sleeve. You see what's going on. It's on clear vinyl. I don't know if this ever came out on any other color. If it came out on black, or this is the only one I remember seeing it on, was this clear wax version. But as is. And Hiller has other stuff that he's done. This isn't the only thing he's ever put out under his own name. But I would definitely check him out. The people that watch my channel tend to really like experimental music, and I find that a lot of people don't know this guy's name. Check him out, man. It's fun to get lost with what he's done, what he's been involved with, the things he's produced and remixed. Everything he's done has always been well worth listening to. Very talented guy. And I think he's one of those fringe guys. Even back in the 80s, I don't know that everybody knew the name Holger Hiller, but they should. And yeah, I talked about Holger Hiller a little bit with Thomas Fellman when Fellman was telling me about his early days and where he started. He brought up Holger Hiller. I remember him telling me that it was very much a collaborative process working with Holger Hiller. And again, I'll link you to that Thomas Fellman interview, because Thomas Fellman's another master of electronic music production. He's so good. Just such a talent. Anyway, as is, check this out. I'm going to hold this up quickly. He released this as well, demixed. Basically, this is a remix album of As Is. As you would suspect, it's a remix album, and by virtue of that, it's a little more dancey. Not a little more, a lot more. Most of the remixers on here I've never heard of. Basically, it's a compilation of very electronic mixing. You hear some disco, some techno, some house, some ambient. You know, it's more of a dance realization of the album as is. But I think it's an essential companion piece to As Is. If you like As Is, you need to get this. Really good stuff. In fact, some of the stuff on this I arguably like a little better than the original on the As Is album. But it's a nice partnership. They work together in concert very well. I think if you like As Is, you need to have demixed. And this came out on mute as well. Get a full album of remixes. This is not a 12-inch. This is like a full 45-minute album. You get some good remixes there. And I'm going to hold this up. This is something I talked about earlier. This is the Ohio Bang Bang 12-inch, and this came out on mute as well. This is the project that Hiller did with Carl Bonney of Renegade Soundwave. Again, hard to describe what this is. It's, I think in the spirit of hip-hop, this is about the most hip-hop in the very core spirit of what Holger Hiller did. This is all sampling. And that's how I think of original 80s hip hop. It was sample culture, and that's what these tracks are. It's almost just nothing but samples, but they're putting together all these samples to make this really compelling track. There are three tracks on this 12-inch. Ironically enough, the best version of this song that's getting remixed and re-realized on this 12-inch is the video version. And to my knowledge, you cannot find the video version of the song anywhere on a physical musical format, which is a bummer. The video version is the best version. I would love to have it on vinyl or CD or digital or any kind of musical version that I could put into my archives. But that version only exists in the video. Does anybody know if that video version is available anywhere on a CD or a tape or a record or digitally? Is it anywhere? I would love to have that. It's been years since I've thought this. I remember seeing the video and I was like, oh my God, that is a great song. And I went and bought the 12-inch and I put the needle down and I listened to all three tracks and I was like, where's the video version? It's not here. What? So I went and bought the CD and the CD's got the video on it. This is back in 1991 that this came out, or 1990? No, was it 89? I guess I've got the record right here. I could look. Yeah, when I rethink, of course, there's no year on here. I think this came out in 1989, now that I think about it. Again, I apologize if I'm getting the year wrong. But a CD single of this came out at a time, and they put the video on the CD, which was at a time where a lot of CDs didn't do that. They were just starting to kind of experiment with this technology, like putting a video on a CD single. In fact, I think it's the first time I ever did that was with this. I think. It's been over 30 years. My memory fades me. But yeah, as I think about it, yeah, I think this was actually pre-as is, 1989 or 90 here. Anyway, I got derailed there. The video version's the best version. Where is it? Can you buy it on a physical piece of media? Is it out there? Does anybody know? I would love to have it. But get this, especially if you're a Renegade Soundwave fan, I mean, you need to have this. This is one of the members of that band. Really cool song, man. When I was a DJ, when I first started DJing in the early 90s, I would do I mainly did raves and things, and I would just beat mix techno and house music and electro music and jungle and drum and bass music. But at the end of every set, I would throw a song in that just didn't really beat match with any song I'd played before it. It just kind of was its own thing. It was basically my exclamation point to my set. I'd always throw a song that didn't necessarily match the same energy as my set before it. And there was a time where I would end my sets with this. And I remember the audience just looking at me like, what the fuck is this? Listen to the song, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I would play the song as my last song in my sets, and it would just completely confuse people. But that's kind of what I wanted. It was my way of saying, all right, my set's over. Get the fuck out of here. And nothing more to see here. And this is a good song to play in that spirit. Great song. I'm not trying to say this is a bad song. It's a beautiful song. And I think most people liked it, but it's not necessarily a song you dance to. I wouldn't say it's in the dance music realm. This was my go the fuck home, I'm done statement. Beautiful record. Anyway, that is my Holger Hiller video. Again, check this out and check out anything Holger Hiller did. Again, he's remixed all the big mute guns: Depeche Mode, Erasure, Nitzer, Fortran 5. He's been there and done that. He's had his hands on a lot of stuff, and his own music is really cool. You can't define it. And I think in a world where it's increasingly hard to make music that you can't define, because everything has been done a million times before, it's pretty rare when it happens. And it happens here. I really enjoyed revisiting this, and I hope you visit it for the first time if you haven't heard it before. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.